Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 88 of Fracking Nightmare. And 88 episodes, and still no further drilling or fracking in the UK since 2011. But the game is hotting up for sure, and the unconventional gas companies and the British government are getting increasingly desperate. They're ramping up their PR campaign, but they're not particularly creative. And in fact, one of their big voices, nasty Nick Greeley, in a recent presentation in the US, said that the UK unconventional gas industry is dead in the water. Well, he's closer to the inside than certainly any of us. And for him to make that observation, he claimed that the gas industry in the UK was pretty uncreative. They got appalling PR, and the anti-fracking community has seriously got its act together. And it really doesn't matter what the British government or the unconventional gas industry in the UK throws at the anti-fracking community, it'll bounce back. And last week we were speaking with Mel Kelly, and we were talking about unfolding events in Scotland. In fact, we were talking on the evening of the Scottish elections. And in the course of the discussion, I predicted a SNP landslide. Well, I didn't actually take into account the creativity, of course, of Peter Lilly. So although we were expecting Nicola Sturgeon to have a resounding victory and establish her majority in Holyrood, it would seem that the British establishment had other ideas. And what better way to do it than obviously to bring on Peter Lilly's company, IDOX, the company that has the contract for managing the postal ballots. And of course, in the previous Scottish election, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Ruth Davidson, actually announced the result before it had been announced. How could she do that? Well, call it a hunch, but probably an inside track with IDOX. And of course, it's IDOX that are going to be responsible for manipulating the outcome of the forthcoming EU referendum on June the 23rd. And by the way, I heard a few hours ago that the Chilcot report is due to be released about 2 weeks after the EU referendum. So that will conveniently take any debate of what transpires in the EU referendum, and it will be manipulated, I'm sure of that. So it'll take any debate off of the British media. Meanwhile, in Scotland, we also discussed that Jim Ratcliffe, the chairman of INEOS, has become increasingly assertive in his statements that the SNP will lift the moratorium. Now, they will now, because obviously with the Tory coming second in Scotland, I mean, who would ever believe that the Conservative Party would come second in a Scottish election? That should ring a few alarm bells. But now that we have an SNP and Tory group there, unless the SNP rebel against the Tories, then I think my other prediction of the moratorium in Scotland being lifted by September is probably a pretty safe bet right now. And literally, as of today, it would seem that INEOS have really got the bit between their teeth now. They're just champing at the starting blocks there. And it was announced in the Scottish press today that INEOS are hiring new managers to frack central Scotland. And this is an article from the Ferret, paraphrasing an article that was in the Scottish Herald. And here's the article. It says, the petrochemical company INEOS is hiring new managers and scientists in London. Oh, so much for contributing to local employment opportunities, with the immediate intention of pushing ahead with fracking central Scotland. And bear in mind, as we discussed last week, the target area in central Scotland is the central belt, where 80% of the population resides. The 28 billion multinational, which runs plants at Grangemouth, is advertising for a new director, a land manager and geologist to exploit licenses granted by the UK government to frack for underground shale gas across hundreds of square kilometres around Falkirk and Stirling. Well, I'm guessing that one of the reasons they need to go to London is so that they can recruit people who have zero attachment or affinity with the area that is being targeted right across central Scotland. It says the company is proceeding despite a Scottish government moratorium and widespread opposition to fracking from communities and political parties. Its move has prompted furious responses from environmentalists and campaigners. Well, they don't really care. You know, the industry is so arrogant, they basically just do this to local communities. They're not interested in what the local community has to say on the subject. And of course, INEOS aren't just restricting themselves to Scotland, because they have picked up numerous licenses right across the north of England, and have also announced that they plan to start seismic testing in areas in Cheshire, in South Yorkshire, and in North Yorkshire. And of course, the seismic activity is the gentle lead-in to full-fledged drilling and fracking. But these companies certainly don't get it all their own way. And one day after the Scottish elections, a tremendous result in Northern Ireland, where, once again, community activism absolutely comes through. This is the community using the resources that it has at its disposal and the creativity. So it's individuals as well as groups all uniting in this common goal to stop the drilling. And although Infrastrata in Northern Ireland had stated, no, we're not going to frack, we're not interested in unconventional resources, we know that this is the same old script that has been tried and tested on other communities around the UK, and the communities see through it every time. And of course, now that the British government has established a political definition of fracking, where basically, unless they pump at least 1,000 cubic meters of water, which is 219,000 gallons and change, then it's not considered to be a frack, or the full 5-stage or multi-stage job using less than 10,000 gallons, cubic meters of water, which is 2.2 million gallons and change. Well, that's why communities have to be alert and vigilant and scrutinize every single statement, every single application that is submitted by the unconventional gas companies. And here was a report that was published following the victory in Ireland, a massive victory for the campaign last Friday in the High Court. Stop the Drill, the local campaign group, are delighted that the judge ruled in favour of the concerned local resident and granted leave that the judicial review can proceed. Infrastrata's barrister Stuart Beattie stated that the company will go bankrupt if the drill is stopped until Mid and East Antrim Council make a decision on enforcement. Well, I'm sure there will be as many tears based on that decision as there were amongst the unconventional gas industry last Wednesday after the London courts ruled in favour of Rathlin Energy. And then I think this was today. Here was one of the local protectors locking on to the rig as it tried to get into Antrim Water well site, I believe. So this is a classic example. This community operating independently, autonomously, it's local people, they understand exactly what's occurring in that area, and they take it upon themselves because they are passionate. And as I have stated many, many times, that the people who are trying to perpetrate this abomination, they do it because they're on the payroll. And passion trumps payroll any day of the week. Well, let's take a look at the north of the UK, because as I've said, the seismic testing is about to commence, and we'll be looking at some of the impacts of seismic testing in East Yorkshire a little later. And here's one of the flyers that I believe was produced by Frackoff, I think. If you go to the website or just punch into your search engine, Frackoff, you'll find a plethora of resources there that you or your community can put to good use. Well, One of the areas that is being targeted very much right now is North Yorkshire. And of course, the MP for the Rydale area, Anne McIntosh, was deselected in the run-up to the elections of 2015. And one can't help but feel that part of the process that led to her being deselected was pressure from central office, because Anne McIntosh was quite open about her opposition to the unconventional gas industry getting a foothold in her constituency in the beautiful area of North Yorkshire. Well, she was replaced by an estate agent, a very wealthy estate agent by the name of Kevin Hollinrake, who is, I believe, the founder of Hunter's Estate Agents. And, nonetheless, use those well-earned resources, I'm sure, to finance his political career. Well, Kevin Hollinrake, when he first took office, made it very clear that he was sitting on the fence. He wasn't going to rush into making a decision about unconventional gas exploitation in his constituency. And so he played the game of pretending to listen to all the arguments, even going across to Pennsylvania to meet with both the industry and the residents who claimed that they had been affected negatively by the unconventional gas industry in their community. Well, it seems that Kevin Hollinrake has established a very sort of, how should I say, close working relationship with John Dewar, the chairman of Third Energy, the company which is 97% owned by Barclays Bank, because Third Energy are now pushing to become the first company to frack in the UK after the moratorium was lifted in December of 2012. Now, they have one advantage, and that is that they already have a well that is drilled and, in their opinion, ready for fracking. And regular viewers of Fracking Nightmare will know that this well is in North Yorkshire. And as you can see, it's in quite close proximity to the most significant revenue earner for North Yorkshire's tourist industry, Flamingo Land. And in fact, the entire village of Kirby Misperton lies between the well that Third Energy wished to frack and this resort, which is just literally 1 kilometre away. So Flamingo Land, you would think, would have taken a very, very deep interest in what's occurring here, because obviously they are totally reliant on people, families even, taking a conscious decision to drive through the lanes of North Yorkshire to come to this resort. And obviously, the fact that it is the #1 revenue earner in North Yorkshire would indicate that they are very successful in that. Well, Flamingo Land have ostensibly taken the line that they don't want to comment. They don't want to impact on other business activities or fledgling business activities in North Yorkshire. But it would seem that somebody within the Flamingo Land management team has had a Damascene moment, and the penny has dropped. Somewhere along the line, they've stumbled across a piece of research that has given them serious cause for concern. And just last week, in the Yorkshire Post, this article was published. Flamingo Land expresses concern over fracking impact on animals. And the article opens, it says the Flamingo Land theme park is opposing plans to frack in North Yorkshire over concerns it could harm its animals. In a letter to North Yorkshire County Council, the park expresses concern the proposal to frack Kirby Misperton in Rydale could be the first of hundreds of wells drilled in the area. See, they're doing their research. The park's letter says changes in Third Energy's plan for dealing with water from the drilling site means it has concern for our beloved and in many cases critically endangered animal collections welfare. The issue here being the water, and we're going to be revisiting this issue of the water a little bit later this evening. The letter continues. Over and above our animal collection, we now have health concerns for local residents, visiting public, and our resort guests. During the summer season, overnight visitor numbers exceed those of the towns the size of Moulton. So this is no Mickey Mouse, well, it's not Disney, but it's no Mickey Mouse resort. It is the most significant contributor to the North Yorkshire economy in terms of the tourism industry. Well, one of the studies that they quote in their letter to North Yorkshire Council is the study that was produced by Dr. Robert Oswald and his assistant, who's a veterinary surgeon by the name of Michel Bamberger. Now, this is actually a report that was written about 3 years ago. And Robert Oswald actually wrote an open letter to David Cameron, and that letter appeared in The Independent on Tuesday, the 17th of September of 2013. And here was the headline: Is fracking a mortal threat to our livestock? And in the article, now in an outspoken warning, US academics behind research linking fracking to sickness and reproductive problems in livestock, including failure to breed, abortions and stillbirth, have told The Independent and The Ecologist that British authorities must halt fracking until more research has been carried out and the health of farm animals can be guaranteed. Robert Oswald, a professor of molecular medicine at Cornell University, and Michel Bamberger, a vet, recently published the first peer-reviewed research suggesting links between fracking and sickness in farm animals. Now, this was the first peer-reviewed research on this subject. Over the last 3 years, there have actually been over 400 research papers, peer-reviewed research papers, that have looked at many of the aspects of unconventional gas exploitation that the industry was desperately trying to suppress. So Robert Oswald and Michel Bamberger compiled evidence from 24 farmers in 6 different states whose livestock suffered reproductive, gastrointestinal and neurological problems after exposure to fracking chemicals in the water or the air. Among the case studies uncovered were 17 cows that died of suspected respiratory failure after exposure to spilled frack fluid in Louisiana, and around 70 in Pennsylvania that died after 140 of them were reportedly exposed to frack wastewater. Of the survivors, less than a dozen produced calves, only 3 of which survived. Another Pennsylvania herd recorded a 50% stillbirth rate after cows had grazed in fields contaminated by fracking fluids spilled from a waste pit. The following year saw an abnormally skewed sex ratio with 10 female and 2 male calf births. Well, of course, the proponents for unconventional gas exploitation would immediately pick up and say, well, yes, but that was in the US. And the problems were caused by spillage from waste pits. Waste pits are not permitted in Europe, and certainly wouldn't be permitted in the UK, where we have a gold standard. Well, but therein lies another problem, because waste pits certainly are not permitted, thank goodness. But what is permitted? And, well, we'll take a look at that a bit later on. Tell you what, I think I need a swig of water, so let's go to the first break, and we'll carry on after this.
The Alternative View Conference presents AV7 Humanity Rising. Speakers include Ian R. Crane, Thomas Sheridan, Patrick Henningsen, Max Egan, Zen Gardner, Dr. Graham Downing, Willem Felderhoff, Field McConnell, Vanessa Bealey, Michael Shrimpton, Fiona Burns. 13th to the 15th of May 2016, Horwood House, near Milton Keynes. Book online at alternativeview.co.uk or call 0207 558 8869. AV7, bringing together some of the most inspirational agents of real change.
Honestly, I've spoken at a lot of gigs, and I'd say this is the best gig that I've spoken at, just because of the lineup of speakers.
And welcome back to part 2 of episode 88 of Fracking Nightmare. Well, we were talking in the first part of the show about the issue of contamination impacting on livestock. And of course, this has come back to the surface after Flamingo Land, North Yorkshire's largest tourist attraction in terms of revenue generation, has finally come off the fence and stated categorically that it is going to oppose the application submitted by Third Energy to frack a well that is situated approximately 1 kilometre from the entrance of this attraction. Well, it seems that there are other reports from North America in addition to the research by Dr. Rob Oswald. And we have this report. I'm just going to show the first page of it here. Livestock falling ill in fracking regions. And this is from December the 1st of last year. And this is Texas. So, if Texas is starting to realize there's a bit of a problem, then I guess we should take note. Well, also in Texas, in Denton, and Denton, of course, is the town where George Mitchell first developed the process that we know as hydraulic fracturing, not in the format that we're talking about today in terms of high volume, high pressure hydraulic fracturing to extract hydrocarbons from unconventional or tight geology, but he developed the process for the stimulation of conventional reservoirs. But it was the basis of the technology which was then further developed through the late 80s and the early 90s into this abomination that we know today, and the British government are trying to foist upon a still largely ignorant, but that's rapidly changing population, because once people do look at this, they very quickly realise that this is not something that they want in their backyard, let alone anybody else's backyard. So in Denton, the new report, and this is literally published today, the new report shows Texas fracking setback distances are inadequate. Now, there are places in the States where literally, and in Australia even, where there are literally fracked hydrocarbon wells right adjacent to housing, to schools, to offices, to other public buildings. And in a lot of cases, the towns or the cities have no ordinance in place to prevent this. In fact, Dallas and Dallas-Fort Worth was one of the first cities in Texas to establish a parameter where it restricted fracking within 1 mile of any building used by the public, whether it be residential or commercial. Here it says, setback distances in Texas are not protective of public health and safety. Assessment of expert opinion on sufficient setback distances for unconventional gas or oil and gas development. 89% of the participants agreed that the minimum safe setback distance is 1/4 mile, 1,320 feet. But 50% of the expert participants regarded 1 to 1.25 miles as a minimum setback. Now, 1 to 1.25 miles, the entire community of Kirby Misperton in North Yorkshire is well inside that distance. Others voiced concerns about setback distances of up to 2 miles. Basically, this is a time bomb. The company will frack the well and then 24 hours later see nothing wrong. There's no problem here. But what they have done is they have unleashed a time bomb that will come back and bite the local community and probably even further afield long after they've gone. Only 2 Barnett Shale cities have adequate setback distances. That's Flower Mound and Dallas. But even those cities include a reverse setback loophole, always loopholes in the US, that allow builders to build new construction only a few hundred feet from established oil and gas wells. This setback loophole puts the health and safety of Texans in danger. Well, it's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. We're dealing with a sociopathic mindset, a mindset where it's an irrelevance. That's why they call it a sacrifice zone, because as long as these companies can benefit from the greed, the officers will benefit from the greed, and even when the company basically is operating insolvently, just like Rathlin Energy, funnily enough. They operate insolvently, but the officers of the company make out like the bandits that they truly are. And where is this heading? Well, regular viewers will recall episode 75. And if you're not a regular viewer of Fracking Nightmare, then I implore you to watch episode 75, in which I had a wonderful lady as my guest, Helen Bender, whose father, George Bender, sadly committed suicide in October of last year, having tried to resist the creep of an encroachment of the gas companies for more than a decade. And this is he had to fight with 2 companies. He had to fight the Link Energy underground coal gasification nightmare, which has effectively created a dead zone of some 320 plus square kilometers in southern Queensland. And he also had to deal with QGC, which was, until recently, a British company owned by BG Group, the spin-off from British Gas. But it was more recently bought by Shell. The companies don't care. They are corporations. They're a corpse, they're an entity. And the human or any other life that gets in their way is just collateral damage. Well, if you have any concerns about the speed with which the British government is trying to force this abomination on the people of this country, then you need to be in Northallerton, in North Yorkshire, on the morning of the 20th of May. That's Friday week. Because this is when North Yorkshire County Council Planning Committee will decide whether or not Third Energy should become the first company to frack in this country since the moratorium was lifted in 2012. This is a company that has 0 experience of this technology. And bear in mind that whether it's Quadrilla, whether it's iGas, or whether it's Rathlin, every one of these companies has proven that they are professionally incompetent. They are incapable of performing these operations without causing either environmental or health and safety issues. The CEOs of these companies actually remind me of this. Now, I was living in the US at this time, and I can remember watching this being broadcast on US TV, and you couldn't make it up. Here we have the chief executive officers of the tobacco companies all swearing before the Senate that they have never seen any evidence which proves there's a link between smoking and lung cancer. And I am absolutely certain that if we lined up Francis Egan, David Montagu-Smith, John Dewar, Jim Ratcliffe, and all the other CEOs of these unconventional gas companies or companies that want to get into this industry, they would hold their hand up and say, I have never seen any evidence that unconventional gas exploitation causes any contamination of water, soil, or air. Which is why you will never, ever hear either the British government or anyone from the industry ever say, don't take my word for it. Do your own research. Take a look, study, and then come to your own determination as to whether this is an industry that is safe. And I can pretty much promise you that you would have to be in the depths of cognitive dissonance to be able to deny the plethora of evidence that proves that this industry has left a legacy of contamination, of serious negative health on humans and on livestock, let alone the impact on agriculture because of the contamination of groundwater wherever it has established a foothold in this country. And this is from a presentation from an activist in the US, the top 10 facts. In 1997, a tobacco chief executive officer said that if it was proven to his satisfaction that cigarettes caused cancer, he'd probably shut the company down immediately to get a better hold on things. Their website now admits that cigarettes cause cancer, but they're still open for business. In 1971, when one tobacco executive was reminded that smoking can lead to underweight babies, he said, well, hey, some women would prefer smaller babies. This is straight out of Hill and Knowlton. These are the PR companies who literally make this stuff up for the CEOs. They have to prostitute themselves. They have to be able to demonstrate that they have an extremely casual relationship with truth and integrity. And we'll take a short break at that point. See you in part 3.
If at this point in time you can stand in front of a drill rig, then stop it from getting on. The easiest drill rig to stop's the first one. The hardest one will be the 10,000. It'll be more than that though in the UK because you're doing shale over there predominantly. Shale needs a lot of wells, needs a lot of destruction, poisons a lot of water.
If this gets the tiniest foothold, you're done. So it's now or it's never. Don't think that you've got that long because it's now or never. So you do it now, you stand up now and you find something within yourself that you didn't think was there. That's the important thing. You will be confronted by police. They wear their Kevlar suits and it's a big intimidation thing.
Hey, you've got nobody in front of you. Keep walking in the way of this lady. Keep going. Don't push back on her. Keep moving. Now. If you've got to keep going. Keep moving.
It's up to the people of the UK to get their cameras in the face of the Kevlar security, the Kevlar police who are paid by the corporations. And we have to say no. That's all it is. But it's more than just saying no at a meeting. It's intent. It's the intent of no. It's the knowing that you mean no. That's when you will be unbelievably powerful. You come out in numbers. If they see your grandmother and the mother and the child come out and say we are not going to accept this, then they are finished. But that's what it takes. Don't sit back and think that anybody's looking out for you. It's you.
Welcome back to part 3. The words of David Monk there. The only people who stop this are you. This is the collective we, the wider community. No organisation, no NGO. This is just community common sense. If you have any concern about the legacy that you are leaving future generations, then you cannot just sit back and ignore this. Don't wait for your neighbour to stop it. When UCOG turned up at Horse Hill a couple of months ago, I had a phone call from a resident in Charlwood, nearby Charlwood, who said, but where is everybody? Where's Frack Free Surrey? Where's all the people who man these camps? And I asked this person what they were doing about helping to raise awareness about resisting the encroachment of this industry on their community. And they suddenly became rather sheepish. Sadly, I have to say that I think there's a lot of work to do in Surrey, because certainly if I was sitting in a gas company right now, it would look to me like Surrey's a bit of an easy target, because there's no community spirit. It's gone. These are commuter belt. People go to Gatwick or they go to London, and they leave at 7 o'clock in the morning and they come back at 7 o'clock at night and they shut their doors and they have no idea what's been going on around their community during the day. And if they're not careful, the likes of UCOG will take advantage of that. So elsewhere in the country, fortunately, that's not the case because there is still community spirit. And in the north of England, if you live in the north of England, then you need to be aware that the British government and the unconventional gas industry has effectively initiated environmental warfare on your communities. Take a look at this map. I mean, INEOS, this company with enormous financial resources, this is just chump change for them. They're not interested in exploiting the gas to be able to sell it to the public. They've made it quite clear. Their reason for targeting the unconventional gas resources across the central belt of Scotland and elsewhere in England is simply to establish a cheap for them, feed source for their refineries and their petrochemical plants. But the north of England is under massive attack. Unless you live in the High Pennines area or in the immediate foothills, whether you're in Lancashire, Cheshire, or the entire area of Yorkshire. And what did Yorkshire ever do to upset Westminster? Because Yorkshire is under assault here like never before. And of course it extends south into Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, and Derbyshire. So if you live in these areas, you very definitely need to be at Northallerton on the morning of Friday the 20th of May. This will be the most significant event since Lancashire County Council made the ruling to not allow Quadrilla to drill and frack 2 wells on the Fylde Peninsula at Rossiter and Preston New Road. Of course, the British government says, oh, sorry, wrong decision. So Quadrilla launch an appeal. The appeal goes before the planning inspector. There's a 5-week inquiry. The planning inspector is due to give her report to Greg Clark, the Minister for Communities, and the announcement is expected somewhere around July the 4th. And oh, what else is planned for July the 4th? Oh, that's right, the release of the Chilcot inquiry. So this has been deliberately contrived to make sure that the interest in whatever the Greg Clark decision, and we know he's pretty much going to rule that Lancashire County Council were right to prevent Quadrilla drilling at Rossiter, but he's going to overrule them so that they can go straight on to the field at Preston New Road. And what should be a story of national interest will be suppressed and probably won't even get a single column inch in the national press because the Chilcot report is due to be released after, 8-9 years? I lost track. So, Northallerton. The location is right opposite the train station, so even if you're not driving, jump a train, come to Northallerton. We need to make Northallerton, a massive community day out where people can network, people can share ideas, and then go their separate ways and apply their own creativity to their campaign in their respective area. Now, also last week, this report came into the public domain. This is the National Science Foundation, the Science of the Environment. A joint US-UK workshop on improving the understanding of the potential environmental impacts associated with unconventional hydrocarbons. Now, this is a 350-page report. If you simply pick any selection of the words there and pump into your search engine, then you'll find the PDF. Much of the 350 pages is basically presentation slides. So there's a lot of padding, a lot of filler. But there's some very interesting comments. And let me, on the basis of the topic we're talking about tonight, make the observation you don't even need to get beyond page 16 of this report before you suddenly realize that, hang on a second, there's a showstopper here. How can this be ignored? And this is looking at the issue of the disposal of waste and produced water. Now, bear in mind that Quadrilla's technical director himself has stated categorically that the unconventional industry, hydrocarbon industry, has no idea where anything up to 50% of what is pumped into the geology where it goes to. It's lost, it's gone, it's on a mission. It's doing what it was designed to do, which is to create artificial porosity and artificial permeability in that geology. And that is ultimately what leads to problems, because it gets into natural geological faults, or it finds pathways where it can breach into more porous geology and eventually find its way into the water supply, as is happening elsewhere in the world. So here in the report, page 16, deep well disposal. Oh, you might have heard of that before, deep well disposal, because that's also the agenda, of course, for the ultimate goal of disposal of toxic nuclear waste. This is the industry thinking ahead, thinking of revenue streams, even if it doesn't get anything from gas because the price is so low. Deep well disposal is currently not permissible under most scenarios in the UK, and that puts additional pressure on research for treatment and the reuse of the flowback and produced water. Research is currently being undertaken into how and when deep well disposal or direct reuse as a hydraulic fracturing fluid can be implemented in the UK. Listen to this very carefully. A huge uncertainty, given the immaturity of unconventional oil and gas development in the UK, is how much wastewater will be produced and regulatory and technical mechanisms for cleaning it or directly reusing it. Without deep well disposal, which of course in the US has been responsible for triggering very, very significant increases in seismic activity, particularly in Northern California and in Oklahoma. It says, without deep well disposal, it is likely that treatment of the dissolved solids will be required. And so research into cost-effective means of doing this is important to the implementation of unconventional oil and gas production in the UK. Basically, that paragraph from a report produced in November 2015 is a categoric admission that the UK unconventional oil and gas industry and the regulatory authorities with their gold standards have no idea how to deal with the produced water and the frack waste. The article continues, or the report continues, the costs related to wastewater production may be significant and could make shale exploitation uneconomic. Really, Sherlock. Research into potential uses of the flowback and produced water that might require less treatment should be pursued, as well as treatment schemes taking advantage of cheap power. Well, of course, in the US and Australia, in some places, the wastewater is being used for irrigation in California and for dust suppression on the roads in Australia. Final paragraph I'm going to quote here. In the UK, deep disposal is not a currently available option, and there is unlikely to be sufficient industrial wastewater treatment capacity to service the needs of a mature operational industry, and so there is a pressing need to address this through research and technological development. How many more ways can they find to say we have no clue? We have no idea how to deal with the phenomenal amount of waste that this industry will generate. And people will remember that Quadrilla shipped its produced water, waste products, to United Utilities in the suburbs of Manchester, and something between 800,000 and 2 million gallons of liquid waste was pumped without any third-party oversight into the Manchester Ship Canal. The solids were so toxic that United Utilities had no idea how to deal with it, and so they sent samples around the world to try and find another company that knew or could develop a technique for cleaning this material. They still don't have an answer. So this is like another nuclear industry, where the nuclear industry generates the product, but it's the waste that is the problem. You stopped dumping it at sea in 1983, I think it was, and now it's building up in temporary storage facilities. Well, nuclear waste is one thing, but the volume of frack waste is going to make the nuclear waste look insignificant by comparison. Now, Third Energy, this same company that is applying to frack the well at Kirby Misperton, last year they were granted permission to drill a well on Ebbston Moor, which is just about 10 miles or so west of Scarborough. Now, this is nicely off the beaten track. Basically, the only reason to go up onto Ebbston Moor is to enjoy the beauty of the location, or unless you are a farmer in the area. Now, the actual well site is right down the end of this track, and this track runs off of a road that basically runs for about 3 miles off the main road that goes into Scarborough from Thirsk. Now, originally, Third Energy wanted to drill, and they wanted to get rid of the waste by pumping it in to a re-injection well. And thanks to the tremendous efforts of the local community, an alternative proposal was put forward. And I think there's a distinct possibility that the amendments made to the planning permission as a result of the efforts from the local community have effectively made this operation on Ebbston Moor non-viable. Third Energy have gone very, very quiet on this well at Ebbston Moor. Now, Third Energy wanted to pump a phenomenal amount of fluid at over 2,000 pounds per square inch. Well, who knows what kind of damage that's going to cause to the geology. Anyway, they were eventually granted permission to re-inject the waste, but only at a much lower pressure, which off the top of my head was around about 400 psi. So about a fifth of what they wanted to do. And of course, the fact that they can only pump it in at a fifth of that rate means that it's probably not viable because they can't get rid of the waste. And it was made very clear that that is the only option available to them. There is not an option to transport the waste from the well site. That is not an option. They either are able to dispose of the waste on the well site, or basically the operation doesn't get the go-ahead. So the onus here is once again on the local community, and all that we can do, those of us who are not permanent residents of that area, is show our solidarity and support, and make it very clear to Third Energy, just like has been made clear elsewhere, that regardless of the outcome of the meeting on May the 20th, and one hopes, of course, that the North Yorkshire councillors do the right thing, that they do their research, and that they understand the potential impact, the negative impact of giving this industry the go-ahead. And if it is granted a go-ahead, then my counsel to the management team of Flamingo Land is to look after the best interests of your unique collection of livestock and seek another location, because I don't think it would be too long before you became aware of some of the negative impacts. In the first instance, it would probably come from fugitive leaks of methane and whatever else leaches out of the well, because that's been the case elsewhere. So why wouldn't it be the case here? Well, now a number of people will be aware, of course, that during the week I had my, well, I don't think it was the final run-in, but it was certainly a victory, I'm sure, for Rathlin Energy and for the industry. I'm sure they quaffed significant quantities of champagne on Wednesday night, but as I said last week, make the most of it, mother frackers, because, you know, he who laughs last and all that. Well, I am pleased to say that, let me just quick history here. This is the well site at Crawberry Hill back in early 2014. In fact, almost exactly 2 years ago, in late April, early May of 2014, where Rathlin Energy had announced that they were intending to return to do further tests at the Crawberry Hill well site. Well, Humberside Police made it very clear that they were not going to facilitate peaceful protest, in direct breach of the ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officer Guidelines, which meant the protection community needed to apply a degree of creativity, and consequently the infamous Crawlbury Castle was constructed. A castle that remained there until the eviction order was granted in late July, and the eviction carried out on the 2nd of August. And I and 3 other people were named defendants in an attempt to try to get the case moved to Hull. Because, as we rightly suspected, the opportunity for a fair hearing in London is very slim. Challenge the corporatocracy in their own capital, and the result is pretty much a foregone conclusion. And although the castle was removed, and eventually the camp was removed from the roadside under an obscure section of the Highways Act, the local community stepped up to the plate in a big way. And the local community, who I hold in extremely high regard in East Yorkshire, made it very clear to Rathlin Energy that they were never going to get an easy ride. They were never going to be given free rein to bring their vehicles onto the Crawlbury Hill well site. And so, regardless of what occurred last week, the reality is that this is the real result. The fact that the Crawlbury Hill well site has now been returned to its former agricultural glory. And Rathlin Energy will never again be coming back to that particular location. Of course, they do still have permission to return to West Newton A and also construct another well site at West Newton B. But their parent company, Connaught Oil and Gas from Canada, must surely be looking at the continuing low price of oil. Okay, it's $44 as opposed to 30. But even at $44 a barrel, there is no possibility that this can be a viable operation. But one of the things that has come out of Rathlin's enterprise in East Yorkshire is very much the impacts of seismic testing. And as I said earlier in the programme, there is going to be a major campaign around the central belt of Scotland and throughout the north of England to do the seismic testing in preparation for literally an onslaught by this industry right across the country. Well, Rathlin Energy have always remained very quiet about the damage that they caused during their seismic testing in the Holderness area of East Yorkshire. Now, one of the largest landowners in that area is the Burton Constable Estate, which is only a few miles away from the West Newton and indeed the new West Newton B well site. Now, there was much speculation that Rathlin Energy had caused a significant amount of property damage in the area, and not least some property damage on the Burton Constable Estate as a result of their seismic testing. But funnily enough, they were remaining very tight-lipped. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with this gentleman, Richard Wassling, who is the estate manager of Burton Constable, and he told me, really without any prompting, that Rathlin Energy had indeed damaged a number of properties on the Burton Constable Estate, but he was waxing lyrical and saying they were, good neighbours, because Rathlin Energy had immediately accepted that they were indeed responsible for that damage, and went to great efforts to ensure that full reparations were carried out. And so, as far as Richard Wassling's concerned, he has absolutely no problems with Rathlin Energy. They caused the damage, and then they did the right thing by arranging and paying for the repairs. Well, unfortunately, that's a very different situation to what occurred a few miles down the road at Whiten. And of course, I have addressed this in the film, in the documentary, Voices from the Gas Fields. And this is the situation to which I refer. This is the fishing lake in Whiten, just a few miles from the West Newton well site. And as I have discussed on previous occasions, this is a business that was established in 2012, and in fact you can go online, you can find this article in the Hull Daily Mail written by a Hull Daily Mail journalist having visited with the family, because this is a business that was set up by the business owner, Anthony Scott, to ensure that his family, his wife and his daughter, had a means of support after he, or if he failed to survive the cancer that he had been diagnosed with. Now, I'm pleased to say that Anthony Scott is still fighting that cancer. He's still having regular treatments, but nonetheless, he's under enormous stress. And the reason that he's under enormous stress is because David Montagu-Smith and his PR consultant, a gentleman, use the term loosely, by the name of Simon Taylor, actually visited Anthony Scott's property. They were taken to Anthony Scott's property by a local councillor, and the local councillor was present when David Montagu-Smith and Simon Taylor, but primarily, of course, David Montagu-Smith, as the chairman of Rathlin Energy, readily accepted and acknowledged that their seismic testing had indeed been responsible for the damage that he was being shown on this property. Well, he couldn't really deny it because Rathlin Energy's own engineer, Caroline Foster, was actually on the property on the morning of December 10th, 2014, when the seismic charges were set off. She saw for herself the damage that resulted from that set of seismic charges being set off, and called the crew leader to try to get the crew leader to shut down any further seismic testing, only to be told that the charges had already been primed and there was no possibility of it being stopped. Well, the damage that has been caused, I mean, you've seen from the photograph there, a significant fall in the level of the fishing lake. Anthony Scott lost his borehole. He had a borehole which he used to replenish the lake. That is now useless. Cracks in the walls and ceilings of his residence, and also damage to the parking area and the pathways leading to his property. Now, all of this physical evidence, it's being surveyed, but the issue here, the real issue here, is the prima facie evidence of the mentality where a chief executive officer can walk into a business knowing that his own senior engineer was present at the time the damage occurred, state to the family that they accepted full responsibility and the family should go ahead and make the necessary arrangements to arrange for the repairs, and then a few weeks later, basically just to say, you know what, it might not have been us, so see you in court. So now, Anthony Scott and his family, for the past nearly 18 months, have had to live with the fact that the business can no longer generate the income that it had been generating prior to that. Obviously, there's no fishing lake there. It's not an attractive proposition. So Anthony Scott and his family are having to be very creative and find ways to generate revenue, and at the same time challenge a corporation that appears to have a bottomless pit of debt to be able to draw on to get the necessary result. So here's the observation. So yeah, you nailed me with your bankruptcy charges because you pursued me on a witch hunt. But do the right thing by Anthony Scott. Go back to Anthony Scott and his family and use the Sunderland Holdings 17 million that went into your account in Jersey in January of this year, and use that money and do the right thing and pay for the repairs so that Anthony Scott and his family can get their business back up and running. Anthony Scott is a cancer sufferer. What are you doing? What are you doing here? Are you simply waiting for him to pass and then hoping that basically you can browbeat and bully his wife and daughter into accepting a lesser amount of compensation? This is what this industry brings. It's the tobacco industry. I can't see any problems. Well, you know, one of the best ways to gauge, it's not always the case, but one of the best ways to gauge future behaviour is to look at past behaviour. And what we're seeing here in the fledgling unconventional gas industry in this country is likely to be continued elsewhere. The private citizen is very much secondary to the socio-psychopathic corporate entity that has no soul. See you in about 3 weeks.